What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Chris, and this is my map breakdown guide for Road Transmission and Battlefield 4. Now, in this guide, I'm going to go ahead and give you guys all the useful information you could ever want on Road Transmission, like how to trigger the Levolution, what points grant commanders what abilities, and of course, how to understand each and every control point and try to use it to your advantage. Now, I also want to mention that every single one of these map breakdown guides is also meant to be done on Conquest Large, but of course, the information should be able to help you out in pretty much every game mode that you can play in Battlefield 4. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right on in to Road Transmission. Alright, so looking at the whole map, we can see that Russia has a definite advantage. Capture Point A is way closer to their spawn than Chinese, so making Chinese attempts to take and hold it much more difficult than, say, Russia trying to take and hold E from China. That being said, their distance from the rest of the map is about equal. The points that are closest together are E, C, and D, giving China a slight advantage there, but nothing that really helps them set up one another. Overall, I believe this map has an advantage to the Russians, but that shouldn't stop great players from China from winning matches. The map has a lot of open areas around A and D, making them very vehicle friendly. B has a decent amount of buildings and other objects to give infantry cover, but is still open enough to be somewhat vehicle friendly. I would consider this a mixed advantage point. C and E are full of buildings, and C is actually covered by the satellite and in a gigantic crater, making it isolated and difficult for vehicles to move freely. C and E are most definitely points focused towards infantry fighting. The map has a total of about 5 capture points. When playing Russia, I would focus on holding A, B, and D. This gives you 3 of the 5 capture points, and they're all on the high ground of the map and are closest to the Russian spawn. When playing as the Chinese, I would suggest focusing on E, C, and D. China's 3 most focused points are a bit more connected and close together than Russia, but they do suffer from having to go up and down a massive crater to get back and forth. The Levolution in Road Transmission is probably the coolest to see in my opinion, but the actual effect on the map is pretty minimal compared to many others we see. The way to trigger the Levolution is to blow up the cables anchored and holding up the dish. The cables are anchored in 2 spots. One is anchored at Capture Point A, and the other is located at the crest of the U-shaped road that runs under E. When this is done, the dish falls on the cement reflector below, cracking it and falling in slightly on part of C. It should be noted that you can walk up these same wires too to get to the top of the pillars. Now we're going to go ahead and start looking at the capture points, and we'll start with A, which is the closest one to the Russian spawn. Now it has an area of open construction with a bunch of double-decker construction offices nearby. It's really open-aired and has plenty of room for tanks to take advantage of, although there is a small spot where tanks and LAVs aren't able to access. Now I think this point favors vehicles due to how open it is and also how open the surrounding areas are. Now this point has one of 2 of the anchors for the transmission dish where you can cut the cords and make the dish fall. Lastly, an LAV spawns at A based on who caps it. B is another point heavily influenced by the theme of construction. The flag itself can be found in a pit of a building that is only partially constructed. There are plenty of objects like explosive tankers, buildings, and wooden pallets to hide behind. This is a pretty mixed point for play between vehicles and infantry. The areas are all completely open air, but it has a lot of small places to take quick runs to. Taking B allows your commander to use the infantry scan, which can be very helpful. C is the point directly underneath the reflector dish. This gives it total coverage from any air units on the map. It also has a ton of scattered buildings, walls, and construction pits. C is a total vehicle nightmare then, because once you move into the point, there are so many places for the enemy to hide and just take pop shots at you from. The perimeter of C is also on a downward slant, making anyone coming from C to another point at a disadvantage because of how little cover there is. But capping C also grants your commander the ability to use the gunship. D is essentially a pit stop station, with 3 small buildings in 3 of the corners. The main feature is an overhang with shipping containers underneath. There's also a helipad on D, and it's the only place that will spawn the attack chopper on the map. The road going through D is the same one that leads to A and B, making hitting these 3 points all the easier for the Russians. If you bounce around these points in a triangle as the Russians, you'll have a very easy time holding the majority of the points. And lastly, capping D grants the commander the ability to use the vehicle scan. Alright, now E is the 5th and final point, and the one closest to the Chinese spawn. It has lots and lots of construction buildings that are hard to blow apart, but the tower that connects to the satellite on it also spawns a weapon drop, making it a very effective perch for any snipers. This point is totally an infantry playstyle control point. Ironically though, it spawns an LAV, just like A does near the Russian spawn. Now this point is by far what I would consider the most important for people spawning as a Chinese. The Chinese team should really focus on using E as a jumping point between C or D. Alright, so that about wraps it up, but again I want to really reiterate that if you're struggling as the Russians, that I suggest that you focus on A, B, and D, especially if you're in a squad. That's going to really help you guys out. If you can bounce between them in a triangle, use that road, but even cut across like the hills and the grass area that's there. You should be able to get back and forth pretty quickly because of all the spawns of like the buggies and all the other vehicles that are there. So that's really what I'd suggest if you're really struggling. Again, playing as a Chinese though, I want to suggest if you're struggling, just focus your defense on D, E, and C. Again, E is probably going to be the best point to try to take because your team, again, if you're just thinking about your team as a whole, just them kind of just like spreading out, just blah, you know, just in any direction. If you take E in for your own squad as well, it's going to be a lot easier for your team to be able to get to D and C rather than trying to hold on to any one of those other points. If I had to choose between D and C to really focus on, I probably would go D because of the attack helicopter, and just because of the fact that it's probably going to be the most hotly contested point. And if you have, you know, I mean, unless you're getting rocked by anti-air, like that's probably your best bet. But that kind of wraps up my suggestions on here on Rogue Transmission. But I do hope you guys really enjoyed this, that it gives you guys a leg up on the competition. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to share with your friends. I'd really appreciate that. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.